women looking for something that's just not there. And too many, I would say, especially women, because there's a lot of things out there telling women that there's one, and there's billions of people on this earth. And if Bob happened to select Jane and Jane was meant for Tommy, then the whole thing is just thrown off. And that's just not true. So I agree with that completely. And I think also too, I like what you said about friendship as well, because you do have to be able to have a friendship. That's what's going to sustain your marriage. I mean, essentially, because it is supposed to be, you guys are supposed to be one in partnership. You guys can't just thrive off of just sex. I mean, you just can't. So I like that you said that as well. All of it, Matt.
Yeah, that was good, Matthew. Thank you for that. And I think we can apply that. And I also think we can reverse engineer that and look back at our previous relationships and look back and learn from people who we knew didn't fit the 4Cs. And I always do this. Every time I've been through a relationship, I stop and think what happened. And in my mind, imagine like a restaurant and the person who's no longer my significant other, just like detailing things that went on, good and bad. And it's always a learning experience. And as we grow and as we remain single, we learn from our elders in our previous relationships, and essentially we become stronger. And the stronger we become, the better spouses will be in the future, as opposed to people. And I'm not saying that some people who meet when they're young can't stay married, but there are a lot of people who get married right out of high school at like 18, 19, and they're divorced by 21, 22. So then what happens is they got burnt, so they don't want to step out anymore. And then years go by, and they get the desire to get married again, but then someone's like, "Oh, you've been divorced already," and like they're burnt goods. And it's not just in marriage. Sometimes it's just in general dating that if you and this is another oxymoron, if you haven't already been in a relationship, some people think that you are damaged goods. Or if you haven't been in a long-term relationship, you're damaged goods. Or you were in a long-term relationship and it didn't work, you're damaged goods. But see, that's kind of silly, because you're not damaged, you're a person living life. And although there are things that happen to you, just because you're not in a relationship does not mean you're damaged. It means you've learned a lot, you've grown, but it doesn't mean you're damaged. But in our current society, a lot of the secular cancel culture comes into our relationships in the Christian church, and people like to say you're damaged for a number of reasons, particularly if your last relationship didn't work out. You're damaged, you're damaged, you're damaged.
Man, that's damage. Sorry.
I was just going to say you end up burnt, bitter, and broken, and that's a bad combination.
Oh, the 3 B's. You just keep them coming, Matthew. So that whole aspect of being damaged is damaging, right? But I find that, and I'm sure I hadn't actually thought about it from like the relationship perspective, because I know when I usually hear it, it's referred to towards women, and how if you were in a relationship and let's say you get pregnant with your partner, then you're now damaged. And it's even in our culture. I'm from Zimbabwe, and one of the things that we do is we have this practice called paying lobola. Lobola is just a bridal price, right? Or a dowry, something that was practiced in the Bible as well. But it's been kind of twisted to where now parents or families charge according to what they consider the value of their child, right? And the value can increase or decrease depending on whether they're educated, whether they have been whether they can cook, clean, all that good stuff. But one of the actual line items, if you will, is called, it's in the word, it's actually called damaged. And you are charged damage if the parents or anybody in the community knows that you have had sexual relations with this with the woman, or if you have impregnated her. And it affects the daughter because the price comes down. And so basically your whole family is upset with you because they're like, you have decreased your value, so now we're not going to benefit from that. And I mean, we even use that in terms of like when we are preaching about purity and we're trying to educate, young people to be chaste and to, observe godly principles. We tell them like, hey, if you don't, you're going to be damaged and nobody will want you. and I mean, but then on the other hand, those that want you to be engaged ask questions like, well, how can I buy something, if I have never tested it? And I feel like this whole thing of damage is really just the objectification of people. We take away our humanity when we focus on or when we label people as damaged, because Christ already told us that, hey, y'all have fallen short, okay? Nobody is more damaged than the other person. We all needed the blood, right? But now we look at people and we're like, okay, well, because you've gone through this experience versus this experience, you're more damaged than another person, which is, I feel, incorrect.
I agree with you, definitely, Gracious, because I see it a lot in the church too. Actually, it's very one-sided towards women. Men, there's not so much shame, but women are definitely shamed for it. Even men in the church are taught to be very particular. You only select a girl who's been a virgin, or I'm sorry, who is a virgin. If she's had an experience before, I'll just call it that, she's no good. And there are a lot of women that, may have been victims of rape or molestation, where that was taken from them. So, so now you're saying that they're no good, or maybe that person grew up in a home where those things were okay and they thought that was okay. Or maybe they just thought at one point in time in life that this is okay for me to do. And they realized later that no. But they're, like you said, they're made whole and new in Christ. So why are they not any good? But I do agree, like, especially in the church, it is definitely targeted towards women and unfairly, because men, it's excused. Oh, you have a sex drive, and it's hard for men. And, a woman, it's just like, oh, you didn't keep your legs closed. You didn't do this. And it's bad where even women who are victims of rape are even shamed. And it's sad and it's not right.
It's like that story, right? The woman who was caught in adultery. Mm-hmm. Like they dragged the woman, but where was the man? And it was like, she was caught in adultery. She needs to be stoned, but there was no accountability when it came to guys. And so sometimes it's this weight of virginity and purity is like, it's only put on women. And I've noticed that, and I don't know, maybe you can educate me and let me know, but one of my biggest complaints has been like, when we do talk about virginity and the purity thing, I haven't seen as much effort being put towards educating men how to do that, and to aspire for that. Then with women, it's like conference after conference, back-to-back AY meetings, and I don't know, that may be cultural, but like, just different meetings and events that really try to get women to hold themselves. And what I've experienced is that even in the church, you may come in contact with someone who doesn't abide by that. And so now what do? You're like, wait, are we getting taught the same thing? And I've seen that you have a lot of quote unquote roots, but then the number of people who are being educated to be Boaz can be a little skewed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I may be wrong, because, guys are like, well, you don't know what we talk about, but I haven't seen as many male conferences that focus on teaching men to be,
I can speak to that a little bit, because that's what I got in youth group, and you're right, there isn't. This is basically what we heard. Don't lust. That's it. Just don't lust. And there was this, and I went to seminary as well, and there's just almost like this, particularly in youth group, going into seminary, there's almost like this, I'll just be real, like this almost sexist view of what a woman is. Like, all she is a sex object that you'll lust after. So just, zip it up. Don't look, don't lust. Don't talk to them. But yet, why are you still single? Well, you just told me not to look at them, not to lust, not to touch them, not to talk to them, not to just like, they're like this Jezebel Delilah type, and I grew up afraid to even talk to them. I grew up afraid of them because they're going to destroy me somehow. And so your remedy is don't lust. That's it. But this is the thing. Paul talks about the thing I don't want to do, I do, and the thing I do want to do, I don't do. This is one of those deals where it's almost like the mind is a very powerful thing, but we don't understand how powerful it is until we end up getting in trouble. If I tell you not to think about a red Volkswagen, that's the first thing you're going to think about. You're going to think about now in your mind, you have a mental image of a red Volkswagen. So when when you're told what not to do, and this, to kind of take it even beyond this is what gets a lot of PKs in trouble, or pastors' kids, preachers' kids. This gets a lot of people who grew up in church. When you get told what not to do for so long, that's what you end up doing. Because now there's this thing in curiosity. And I have a friend of mine who's a pastor now, but he used to be in the music industry, like the hip hop industry or whatever kind of. And he helped produce a lot of these albums that had a lot of explicit content. And he said, we knew in the industry, if we said, don't listen to this album because it has explicit language and sexual graphic language, if we put that on the album, we knew people would go buy it because now they were curious. So if you're telling me as a teenager back in youth group, don't lust, don't lust, don't lust, don't look at women, don't look at women, don't look at women. All I'm hearing is lust, 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 lust. You're telling me what not to do. And now you have put in me a sin consciousnness. And so now I'm going against what Scripture says not to do. It says to get rid of the sin consciousness. I believe it's in Hebrews. To remove the sin consciousness is to change your focus. But if the focus is constantly the sin of what not to do, then all of a sudden that's what I'm going to do. Is because now all of a sudden, if we constantly are talking about lust and lust and lust and lust, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. And as a guy, it's not hard for me to do that anyway. But if we're constantly talking about what I shouldn't do, but not equipping me with what I can do, I never thought it was possible to have a healthy relationship with a woman, even within marriage. Because then they're like, well, can you lust after your wife? It's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Really, literally, like you just cannot win. So you can't win for losing. So like a woman, for me, growing up in the faith through youth group and even through seminary, and this kind of really came through this. There's this one book, I'm going to mention it. I think I will say it has to be one of the worst things that's happened in modern Christianity because it affected, it really spurred this on. It's I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And it is a book that really put this almost toxic purity in there because it was hyper purity, like, oh my gosh, like there's a woman on the sidewalk, I have to look the other way. And there's even a really extreme case of it. There's a school that you can't even look at members of the opposite sex in the eye. They call it like eye kissing or like eye sex. Like if you look each other in the eye, you're having an impure.
I heard it was called eye babies.
Eye babies, yeah. It's like you can't even. It's like that level of extremism and purity. It kind of comes from this culture. Like I'm just gonna not even associate with them. I'm gonna turn my head and look away, and then all of a sudden I'm gonna trip into the God's like, there's your wife. Oh, this one human being, this one woman, I can talk to her. But the other ones, like they're gonna. I'm gonna trip and fall every time I just look in their general area. That's kind of the
what you're Matt,
like
what you're saying is the Medusa effect.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at them, then you will die.
Yeah. So what happens is you get guys they're striving for godliness, and they're the kind of guy that women in the church are looking for, that godly women are really looking for. They're seeking after God. They're doing. I mean, they have that spiritual maturity. But these guys, and I would put myself in this category of being, and coming up in that, we're scared of you because we were pretty much told everything that you do is going to destroy us. You're going to destroy our ministry, our career, our life. We're going to fall into sexual temptation by just talking to you. I mean, like, it's just like this, like you talk to a girl, then that's just automatically going to lead to like premarital sex. And that's just like, I don't understand where that comes from. But there's this adamant, like, oh, just ignore them, just like, and because lust. We're so worried about lusting that we don't equip and disciple men to be, tough and tender warriors for God, passionate lovers, defenders of those who are that are in need of being of being defended, and defending women and children, and looking out for those in need. We don't disciple men to be that. So then it's only natural for us to be clueless on relationships, and then say we get married, we're clueless in marriage because now all of a sudden we have no experience talking to a woman. Boom. So now we're like, what do I do? And so anyway, so that may be a long answer to a short question, but
no, that was really good, Matt. But I think that is kind of funny, but not funny, haha, that we have a Christian response to literally everything else. Not killing people, being kind to people, raising a family, even down to taking care of animals. There's Bible references to that. But what we don't seem to have is a clear cut like discipleship program in any church that teach people who are not married yet, who would like to get married, on how to pursue that. Is often in happenstance. like almost like when you like, okay, there's a lot of old westerns, and there will be a snowstorm or a rainstorm, and then there'll be a safe house somewhere, and someone's like, oh, you made it through that storm? It was pretty bad out there. That's pretty much what marriage is in the Christian body. It's like, oh, you finally got married? I didn't know if you're going to make it out there. So that kind of mindset is what we often deal with, is that we have no help. They encourage us to pray about finding your person, and God will give. I mean, not that God won't, but there are people in church who's already done this, who they could help counsel young people who would like to get married, but then that doesn't often happen. And then what happens? We bring somebody in, and someone's like, well, why do you marry her? You didn't tell me anything. So now let's hope that you have a good relationship with your parents who can give you advice. But if not, or if you like to have more information about this, you have no help. And oftentimes the singles ministry is labeled as that help, but oftentimes it actually doesn't help you. So what happens is that we, as young people or single people, we are growing and we are learning constantly. And we have an approach to to Christian businesses. Like, okay, I need to make sure I do my tithes, and I gotta make sure that all my weights are equally measured, quote unquote. I gotta make sure I do this and try to take care of whatever I have to take care of. But when it comes to marriage, it's like, let me just throw this like ball in the Grand Canyon and hope it lands. You know, there's a hoop in the Grand Canyon. Let me just shoot this basketball from a helicopter and hope and hope it makes a point. That's pretty much what it is. It's like a roulette system where we don't know, so we're just constantly searching and hoping something happens, and then we're like, oh, Pastor, do you have any kind of ministerial things you could tell me how to find a wife? Suit yourself, figure it out, hope it works out.
That's so real. The thing is, I think it kind of ties back to what Matthew was talking about, that oneism, or that the idea of the soulmate, because there's this idea that if you find the soulmate, or when God brings you, because for us as women, we're taught we don't go looking for them, right? He's just gonna voila appear magically because God is gonna bring him, but or bring us to him like he brought Eve. Then it's just gonna automatically work out because that's your soulmate. You know, like you're not gonna have any issues, you're not gonna have any problems, you know, because this is the soulmate. And that's how you know that it's a soulmate, because if you have any issues, that's not your soulmate. You know, and I think that we've kind of, you know, let go of responsibility in the church to educate. You know, the Bible is clear. It says elder women teach younger women, elder men teach younger men, but there isn't a lot of that going on, specifically as to how to do things the right way. It's usually the focus is on what not to do, and fear mongering, you know, because I think like another thing that you brought up was how, you know, you guys have been socialized to be afraid of women, and just looking at them as just like a trap for lust. Guess what? Women are also taught to be afraid of themselves and their own bodies, you know, and it's like we're taught, like, you know, we have to protect you from us, you know. You know, like if you're afraid, like you end up, you can be in a church service or like a potluck, you're afraid to get up and walk across because you're like, you know, I don't want to be looked at like I'm trying to tempt men, or like you can be talking to an elder and somebody is in the background saying, she's, you know, trying to get after so and so. And so we're taught to be afraid even of ourselves, you know, and there isn't the other side of, you know, how to renew our minds, and what is the correct way to walk in our singleness.
I agree. I agree with that as well. And I agree too, just to say about the body, it's like there's a lot of shaming as well. It's just like, oh, well, you know, you can't wear this. You know, I remember going to like camp or whatever, they like enforced that girls wear shirts over their bathing suits. You know, it's like you don't want to cause the guys to stumble, you know, with your one-piece bathing suit, you know, that's non-revealing. You know, it's just like it's very much enforced. I will also say too, a little bit to Matthew's point too, about men teaching men to be like basically afraid of women, and even on your end too, about women to be afraid of themselves, and even men sometimes. It's just that a lot of churches sometimes push, well, the one thing to cure this lust problem is to get married. And, you know, so there's that. And people go into marriage expecting all of their lust desires to be fulfilled. And it's not always the case, because two people have to agree. And so there's a lot of that too, of, well, one way to fix all of this is you get married and you're going to feel better because you'll have the companionship that you've been longing for. You'll have the sex that you've been longing for. You'll get to see things that you wanted to see. And so I think that there's a lot of that being sold to people as well. Just to go in a different direction here.
That's a very good point, Amber, that marriage is not a cure for lust. You know, if you don't have that in control, you are not gonna, it's not gonna magically disappear just because you said I do. And I love that you brought in the idea of consent. You know, consent is so necessary because I think that people do have this idea that once I get married, then I'm just going to be able to do what I want and like unleash the beast, you know? That sounds like wrong. It's like that I no longer have to be self-controlled. I no longer have to exercise discipline. And it's like, that's not what God is calling us to, you know? Whether you're single or you're married, in both conditions, you need to have that skill. And so lust is something I think needs to be talked about, not just for, you know, single males, but even for married people. Now, I know it sounds weird to talk about like lusting after your wife. I don't know that you can do that, but I think it's like I don't think it's like, I think it's just like your mindset, you know, like the perversion that you may have of what you think sex is, and how you get it or how it's done, you know, taking away like the beauty that God intended it to be. I read today, well, I was actually listening to a podcast that was talking about how you can be fulfilled with your sexual desires as a single person. And they were talking about, you have to recognize what sex is for. Like that desire was actually created by God for to replicate the thirst and the intimacy that we need to have for Him. And when we come together, you know, with our spouse, we are experiencing the oneness that God wants to experience with us. And so they were talking about using sex whenever you feel those desires to drive you towards a deeper and like more intimate relationship with God, and recognizing like that's the purpose of those urges, is to have is to draw you towards intimacy, you know, but the ultimate intimacy is that it's supposed to be like your fulfillment with God. But nobody, like that was the first time I ever heard that, you know. We're just taught like sexual urges are bad and something to be shunned and something to like, you know, push to the side. And I think then that affects how we are able to engage with other people, because if we see them as traps for these urges and as traps for or as outlets, you know, and not necessarily as partners towards that, you know, more that fulfillment, then it just leads to, you know, more unfulfillment, I guess.
Yeah, you know, what I see, the way I see marriage and prior to that relationship is partnership. And the more you're in a partnership, the more things work, or a team. You know, different job positions, you work in a specific role in your job. Well, if you were working every role at your job, you were taking calls, you were printing papers, you were the janitor staff, you were in the kitchen, you were signing off on the CEO's contracts, you were the vice president. There's every hat in the company. If you were doing all of that, you're not in a team. You're in a one-man show. And and when you're looking for someone, you're looking for someone who's going to complement you, who is your partner. partnership is what the Trinity is based off of. Is 3 in 1. Well, on Earth we have two. Technically, it's the same thing because when a child comes in the middle, then that is 3 in 1. Two people and one person with a family. But that's why we want that in the confines of marriage, because in the confines of marriage, there's a lot more support. There's a lot more. The relationship is better, I think, if two people are married and then they have a child. But what often happens is that the partnership is disrupted, especially if you have multiple partnerships. If you're dating Karen on the left and you're also have a child with Susan on the right, and then you have a duplicitous relationship, and you don't know where your heart is actually really located. And so in partnership, you're taking two hearts and trying to complement the other one. Now, yes, it's not perfect, but I mean, you're not perfect either. None of us are perfect. And in creating a marriage, the point is for us to become one, and that oneness is creating another imperfect person. We're not imperfect here and imperfect there and make perfect. We're imperfect separate, and we'll be imperfect together. But it's that intentionality to work to become better, not perfect, but better, is how we grow. And if we don't fight for that, then we're not going to get to it. Just like we fight to be better people by praying, following the tenets of Jesus, trying to be Christians, our marriages, or therefore our relationships, should be in the same vein.
You said something there, Reggie. I didn't, and mind blown that you said when two people come together, you have two imperfect people who come and they make a one imperfect person. I mean, that's powerful to me, because I think up until now I had kind of thought about it like it's my imperfection and your imperfection, we come together, but now like my strengths complement yours and then your strengths complement mine, and so now together we can be perfect. But at the end of the day, like you just said, we're never we will not reach perfection on this side of the earth. Like on this side. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't fully experience what God has for us, and that we can't resist the temptations that come, or that we can't thrive. But I think recognizing that even when we come together, we're still going to be imperfect. And so really, it's going to take a lifetime of commitment to just become better together, And I would want people to, if we can recognize that even when we come together with another person, our oneness is not going to be perfect. I think that we would start the journey of like personal development and like self-work even before we get to that relationship. And that's what I believe singleness is supposed to be for, like it's that time period where you really have an opportunity to hone in and zone on like the things that you can do to become a better person overall. But a lot of times people waste their singleness, waiting for that partner or looking for that partner, or thinking like, when I get a partner, things will be so much better. And then I can start working on A, B, C, D, or thinking that partner is the one who's responsible for holding them accountable to what they should be doing already.